Hi, USY. I hope you've had a great first half of day two at I See Everywhere. I loved getting to see you all in our workshops, and I don't know about you, but even just a little time to connect and learn together felt really special. I think our speaker tonight is going to be quite special too. So let's get this session started. Tonight, USY is proud to have Sarah Hurwitz with us on the IC virtual stage. Sarah was a White House speechwriter from 2009 to 2017, starting out as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama and then serving as chief speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. Sarah worked with Mrs. Obama to craft widely acclaimed addresses and traveled with the First Lady across America and to 5 continents. Before working at the White House, Sarah was chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton during her 2008 presidential primary campaign. A graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, Sarah is the author of Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, after finally choosing to live there. Michelle Obama tweeted about Sarah's book saying, "Sarah Hurwitz is a brilliant writer with a big heart and a kind soul, and I'm sure Here All Along will reflect her thoughtfulness and eloquence, which I depended on for so many years. I'm so proud of you, Sarah, for sharing your journey and your voice with the world." Sarah, thank you again so much for joining us here at International Convention. As teen leaders and Jewish teen leaders, we are so excited to hear more of your story tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It is great to be here. Rena, thank you for taking the time from Israel, where it's the middle of the night, to be in conversation. And I'm just really excited to be here with all of you.
I'm so excited to be speaking with you as well. And that brings me to my first question. How did you get to be head speechwriter for Michelle Obama? What was it like to work for her? Give us a real behind the scenes look.
Yeah, so the truth is, I got to be her head speechwriter through a lot of failure, actually. I got my start in politics as an intern in the White House in the summer of 1998 in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office. And the writers I worked for helped me get my first 2 jobs out of college, both of which were total failures. One was for a United States senator as his speechwriter, and his chief of staff literally sat me down after a year and was like, "I heard that you applied to law school. Yeah, you should go. I think that's a better fit for you than speech writing." It's like, I was 22. I didn't know how to write speeches. I don't know why they hired me. I then went to law school. I happened to meet a guy in law school who'd previously been a speechwriter for President Clinton, and the two of us just started freelancing together, and he really taught me how to write a speech. So then we got jobs on a presidential primary campaign in 2003, and the candidate lost. We got our jobs on John Kerry's presidential campaign in 2004. Kerry lost. Got a job as Hillary Clinton's chief speechwriter in 2008, and she too lost. So just, it's 2 failed jobs, 3 losing campaigns. And then I got really lucky that I got hired on Obama's campaign in 2008, and he actually won. New experience for me, very exciting. And so I got to go to the White House. And it's funny, when I worked on the campaign for him, I helped Mrs. Obama with her 2008 Democratic Convention speech. We really hit it off. So when I went to the White House, even though I was there to write for him, I would kind of help her out on the side. And after a while, I realized I actually liked writing for her better than writing for him. I just felt more at home in her voice. I was more interested in what she was talking about. So I made a very unusual White House career move, and I actually left the president and went to work for the First Lady. And, she is just amazing. She's someone who knows who she is. She always knows what she wants to say. And I spent a lot, the trick of writing for someone like her is just to sit down with her and be like, "What do you want to say?" And she would just, she would articulate brilliant ideas, messages, themes, language, and I would type as fast as possible on my laptop. I would sort of work into a draft, and then we would just go back and forth. She would line edit, I would edit, she would edit, I would edit. We'd go through draft after draft, and then she would deliver it. And, sometimes it involved traveling all around the world. And it is just amazing to me that, if I asked all of you guys, who is the first spouse of Ghana, Argentina, Japan, you don't know. I don't know. But everyone knew who Michelle Obama was. And people would just line the streets. Kids would be like screaming and crying and so excited to meet her. And it was just a really exciting face of America to represent to the world. So it was a great experience.
That sounds like a really incredible journey. So after leaving the White House, why did you decide to write a book about Judaism?
Yeah, I got that question a lot. That was not what my colleagues were expecting of me. I grew up maybe like some of you or maybe not. I didn't really have a lot of Jewish background. I was never part of a Jewish youth group like USY, unfortunately. And for me, Judaism was like two boring services at my synagogue and a boring Seder. And after I became a bat mitzvah, I was like, yeah, I'm good. I have nothing to see here. This is boring. If I want to find meaning or connection or spirituality, I'm going to have to look elsewhere. Fast forward 25 years later, I broke up with the guy I was dating, and I just had all this time on my hands that I used to spend hanging out with him. And I happened to hear about an intro to Judaism class at the local JCC. And I really thought, like, whatever, I'm a cultural Jew, I'm a Jew by heritage. I guess I should learn something about my culture. So I signed up just on a whim, but I was totally blown away by what I found in this class. There was so much wisdom about how to be a good person, how to lead a really meaningful, powerful life, and just how to find profound spiritual connection. And I just thought to myself, like, where has this been all my life? Like, I didn't see this in synagogue. I didn't see this at the Seder. So I started taking more classes and I read more books, and I was just blown away at all of the radical, insightful, inspiring, moving wisdom that Judaism has for us today about how to cope with our lives, about how to deal with the challenges we're facing. But the problem was, like, the books I was reading were either kind of nuts and bolts how to books, which were great, but not really kind of getting me, or there were these really sophisticated esoteric books, which I kind of found painful. And I just was like, I want to write a book that I'm looking for. The book that really goes into the why to. Why does this matter? How can Judaism transform your life and enrich your life and bring beauty and meaning and joy to your life? And so that's the book I decided to write, much to the surprise of many of my colleagues. So I think we're a little confused, but we're happy to see that I was happy. And I am. I think a lot of people thought, like, oh, you should go write speeches for CEOs or celebrities, or, go help Mrs. Obama with her memoir. And those would have been great paths. But, my heart was telling me that this was the path I wanted to take. And I'm really glad I took it.
So you're talking about Judaism and learning about Judaism, and I want to talk about Jewish spirituality. A lot of people are looking for answers and solace right now. And while we often say the word God in prayers in our synagogues, Jews don't talk about what we mean by that. So, what does the word God mean to you? What could it mean to Jews who might struggle with faith at a time like this?
Such a great question. Growing up, I always thought that the Jewish God was like a man in the sky who controls everything and rewards and punishes people as they deserve. And I just didn't believe that. So I figured, okay, I must be an atheist or agnostic or spiritual, but not religious. That is not actually what Judaism says about God. If you study Jewish theology and spirituality, you find that we have this incredible humility about the divine, that we are talking about something that is so much bigger than what our tiny little human hearts and minds can cleanly define or categorize. So there is no simplistic Jewish definition of God, right? That would almost be like idolatry, right? It would be reducing this infinite, unfathomable mystery into this tiny little thing that our human minds can grasp. So instead, what you have in Judaism is you have centuries of different thinkers and theologians articulating various conceptions of God, accordance with their own experience and their own understanding of Jewish tradition. So you have thinkers who say that God is everything. You're God, I'm God. The man who I passed on the street who said, hey, can you spare $1? Like, that man is God. There is no barrier or separation between any of us. Well, that's a powerful idea. There's Mordecai Kaplan, who says that God is the process by which we each become our highest and truest selves, right? The process by which we each become kinder and more honest and more brave and more courageous. There is Martin Buber, a Jewish thinker, who says that God is what arises between two people in deep relation with each other, right? Being fully vulnerable to each other, really like hearing each other and seeing each other. What arises between them is God. Now, none of those are a man in the sky, right? So to me, I take all these various theologies, and what I've come to believe as God is that I do believe that God is, it's the source of all life. God is everything. God is that process by which I become my highest and truest self. But I can't relate to like a force. I can't relate to everything, right? I'm a human being. I need language of relation. So I refer to this, whatever it is, as you, right? I refer to God as you. I address God as you. I feel God as a force of love. If you asked a tree how it talks to God, it would probably use a different language, right? It's a tree. It has a different way of relating to the divine, as do all living things. And so I think it's really important for you guys as young people to realize that Judaism actually has a lot of really deep spiritual wisdom. I think it's easy to think like, oh, I've got to go to Buddhism or Burning Man or astrology or wherever to find spirituality. And you really don't. It's all here in Judaism, and it's so incredibly powerful and so diverse. And I think it's really worth kind of exploring for yourself, because you guys, you're old enough now to really start thinking about this seriously and deeply. And there's just so much to find in Judaism.
What about prayer? Some of us may be feeling the instinct to pray right now, but when we think of Jewish prayer, we think of services in packed synagogues, which obviously isn't safe right now. How can Jews
Right.
pray in a time of social distancing?
It's so funny. I think it is. I always thought that Jewish prayer, that really authentic Jewish prayer, was like scripted communal prayer in a synagogue that I didn't really understand and found very boring. And like, that's Jewish prayer. And you know what? That actually is one form of Jewish prayer. And actually, like, our prayer book, if you really start to study it and learn about some of the meanings behind the prayers, it's actually very profound. It's not really something that's meant to be read on a surface level. But scripted communal prayer is not the only authentic form of Jewish prayer. You guys, I'm sure, have probably read the Torah or parts of the Torah. When our ancestors wanted to pray, they didn't whip out a prayer book written in a language they didn't understand. They just talked to God. Whatever that means for you, right? Just speaking out loud to the divine, that is a totally authentic form of Jewish prayer, personal, unscripted prayer where you just pour out your heart. I also learned, I was very moved by, there's a whole set of blessings. We have this wonderful blessing practice with all these beautiful ancient blessings for various moments in the day. Before you eat, when you see a rainbow, if you happen to see a rainbow, after you go to the bathroom, which sounds kind of weird and gross, but is actually pretty moving because you're sort of giving thanks for your body working properly. Right? These are moments throughout the day when you can just take a moment to feel gratitude or awe or wonder. Right? Judaism is kind of pushing you to have moments where you just step out of the ordinary, the everyday. Jewish study is also considered a form of worship, which kind of, at first I was like, really? Study as worship? But when I study Jewish texts, I feel like I am hearing the words of my ancestors telling me about what it means to live a meaningful and beautiful life. And that can actually be quite emotional and spiritual. And then finally, there's a Jewish meditation tradition that dates back centuries and centuries. So we have all these different spiritual techniques and tools that a lot of us don't know about. So I think there's just so many options when we can't gather safely in a synagogue, and even when we can.
Needless to say, we're living in a pretty challenging moment right now. What do you think is the most important insight Judaism can provide us at this time?
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about chesed, which is, as many of you know, means loving kindness. And when you kind of study the Jewish thinking around chesed, how we show each other loving kindness, you find a lot about presence, right? About like, when someone is sick, you don't just like send them a text. You actually show up for them, right? You go and you visit them and you spend time with them. When someone has lost someone they love and is in mourning, you don't just like send some flowers. You actually show up for the funeral, the shiva, you show up with your presence. Obviously, we can't do that right now, right? It is not safe. But just because we can't be physically in the same room, that doesn't mean we still can't be present for each other. And I'm very moved by this ministry of presence that Judaism demands of us, where it really demands that we get, when someone is struggling, we get right up close to them and we are just there for them. Not necessarily to solve their problem, not to fix things, but just to show them that we care, to show them that they're not alone. So I think that ministry of presence right now feels very important in a time when so many of us are struggling. And there's a story in the Talmud, which are these ancient Jewish commentaries that form the basis of much of Jewish law, where it's a story about this rabbi, we'll call him just Rabbi A. And, Rabbi A, he gets sick. And Rabbi B shows up and Rabbi B heals Rabbi A because Rabbi B has these magical healing power. But then Rabbi B gets sick and Rabbi C shows up and heals Rabbi B. And the Talmud's like, wait a second. Rabbi B had these magical powers to heal Rabbi A. Why didn't Rabbi B just heal himself? Why did he need this other guy to show up and heal him? And the answer is that the prisoner cannot get himself out of prison. And I think that's a very powerful story because I think so many of us feel trapped in our own anxiety or loneliness or fear or whatever it is we're dealing with. And we just need someone else to show up and take our hands and kind of free us from that prison. So I think that, as much as we can do that for other people right now, and as much as we can ask for that and receive that, because I think we all need that. I think we're all Rabbi B right now, and it's just important to be open to that.
What do you think is the biggest challenge the American Jewish community faces today?
Yeah, for me, I think by far the biggest challenge we face is Jewish literacy. And I know, so many of you, I think, are among, the much more literate Jews. You're engaged in USY. I'm sure a lot of you went through Hebrew school, confirmation, like you're pretty engaged. But, I gotta be honest, a lot of Jews are like me 8 or 10 years ago, right? 8 or 10 years ago, if you had said to me, Sarah, what does Judaism say about God? I would have been like, man in the sky, I don't believe in. Okay, that's not true. There's all these different theologies of God. If they had said, what does Judaism say about what it means to be a good person? I would have been like, Tikun Olam, social justice. That's lovely. That's also true of every religious tradition and also of just decent secular people, right? Judaism has an entire massive, vast body of very specific laws about social justice and Tikkun Olam, but most of us don't know anything about them. So these are two of the most important questions that any human being can ask about their life. And it worries me greatly that a lot of Jews can't even answer them, right? I worry that we kind of have really leaned into this idea of Jewish peoplehood and being part of a culture, which is great and very powerful. But in America, that's a very hard thing to sustain. How many people do you guys know who define themselves deeply as being Irish American or Italian American or German American? Well, 150 years ago, a lot of people did, right? They were recent immigrants from those countries. This was a very important part of their identity. But now, 150 years later, they're like, oh yeah, my great grandma back in Italy, I think I have a recipe from her. It's not meaningful. And it worries me when I hear a lot of Jews saying, well, my grandmother was Jewish, but right? They're like, oh, I'm a cultural Jew. That's not enough to sustain an identity in America. I think we're really going to have to be much more literate.
So, going back to your speech writing and your journey in the White House, can you tell us your craziest White House war story?
Sure. There's so many of them, but I'll tell you one. I spent the first 2 years working for the president, and this is one from when I worked for him. I wrote his first college graduation speech, which was at Arizona State University. And, this was back in 2009 when, gosh, it's so funny, you guys were little kids then, but, the economy was just totally crashing. We were on the brink of a Great Depression. The banks were failing. The auto industry was crumbling, and we were in a very scary time. So, a college graduation speech was not top of mind for President Obama, but we met with him and he was kind of distracted and, gave me a few ideas, but just didn't really seem focused. So, I wrote the speech I thought he wanted and I gave it to him a week in advance. I heard nothing, figured it was okay. The morning of the speech, I got awoken by a call saying the president would like to see you right away in the Oval Office. And, I'm not dressed. I'm not ready. I'm totally panicking. So I throw on clothes. I run into the office. I'm totally bedraggled and out of breath. I just go to the Oval Office. I sit down. And the president's like, well, look, I'm so sorry about this, but I did not get a chance to look at the speech till last night. And this isn't the speech I want to give. I was like, okay, the speech is today. Okay, I guess I need to write you a new commencement speech. So he starts dictating an idea for an entirely different speech, no relation to anything I've written. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to write this speech in the next 4 hours. So I run back to my office. I frantically start writing. My colleagues are helping me. Everyone's running around. We're trying to get a new draft together. I throw together something in a few hours. I give it to him. He's like, okay, this is a start, but it's not quite there. Gives me more edits. I'm rewriting. And I realize that I'm about to miss the motorcade, which is the cars that take staffers from the White House to Air Force One, which is can be a 20 to 40 minute drive depending on traffic. They leave well before the president does. And I'm like, I'm going to miss this. So I called our scheduler and I was like, I'm going to miss the cars. And they said, okay, don't worry. We'll get you on the helicopter with the president. Because that only takes 10 minutes. So he leaves right before Air Force One takes off. So they're like, that's kind of cool. So I'm working, I'm writing, I'm frantic. Finally, I have to go meet the helicopter. So I'm crossing the South Lawn, dropping papers. I have my laptop open. I look like a crazy person. I get into Marine One, the helicopter, which is tiny. It's so tiny, my knees were almost touching the president. and I'm still trying to edit the speech, and we're flying over the Washington Mall, and President Obama says to me, "What are you doing?" It's like, "I'm editing your speech." He was like, "Stop working on the speech. Look around. Enjoy the view. How often are you going to see this?" It's like, okay. So I look around, go back to the speech. We get on the plane, still rewriting this on the plane. And the computers on Air Force One in 2009 were so slow. They had like a keystroke delay. So I would like hit a key and then the letter would come up. But it was maddening. I'm panicking. I'm trying to print. The plane has landed. Our trip director is standing over my shoulder being like, "Get off the plane, get off the plane. We got to go." I just barely make the motorcade off the plane. We are still editing it in the cars. We get to the university and I was like, "This is going to be a disaster. Like, this is not going to go well. And I just have to get through this and it'll be over." But you know what? Barack Obama stepped up at the podium and delivered that speech like he'd been giving it every single day for his entire life. It was flawless. It was perfect. I couldn't believe it. And, he just totally unfazed by the whole thing. And I just thought, wow, that was a very long day. So that was definitely a crazy day.
Can you tell us about the most Jewish speech you've ever written?
Oh, yes. So, I have written, I wrote a Holocaust memorial speech. I've written like Hanukkah stuff, but I actually think that probably what feels most personally Jewish to me is a speech that was actually another commencement speech, a graduation speech for Michelle Obama. And it was at the City College of New York. And when I heard she was giving this speech, I was really moved because when my great grandparents first came to America, they moved to New York City. And my great grandmother was so excited because they had 4 daughters. And she found out that there was this city college system that it accepted women, it accepted Jews, and it accepted people with no money. And that was my family. That was her 4 daughters. So she thought like, "Oh my gosh, in America, my girls can go to school." But unfortunately, the family actually left the state. They moved out of state. And my grandmother, who was one of those 4 daughters, she never got to go to college. And this was a source of so much heartbreak for her throughout her whole life because she loved politics. She was so passionate about social justice, and she wanted to go to law school and become a lawyer and go into politics. Like that was her dream. And, it just made her so sad her whole life that she couldn't do that. And so it was so moving to me that just 2 generations later, I am rolling up to the City College of New York, the very place where my grandmother yearned to attend. And I have gone to college. I have gone to law school. I am a lawyer. I am working in politics, and I am with the First Lady of the United States. And Mrs. Obama's speech was about the power of diversity and how immigrants have always made our country great, about how our diversity is our greatest strength. And looking out at those graduates, they came from 150 nationalities. They spoke 99 languages, and they really are this generation of striving, dreaming immigrants sitting in the very seat where my grandmother and maybe some of your grandparents and great grandparents, so many Jews yearned to sit for generations. This was a school that so many Jews attended when they first came to this country. And I just thought, what a beautiful illustration of the American dream and the arc of history when it goes well. So that was very Jewish and very moving.
Can you give us your 3 best tips on powerful moving communication and storytelling?
Yes. So, okay. So my first tip is say something true, which sounds really obvious, but I'm not just saying don't lie. What I'm saying is that oftentimes when people are trying to figure out how to write something or how to speak, they're really concerned with how to say it or how to write it, but they're not really thinking clearly about what to say. So they're thinking, okay, what will make me sound smart or powerful or funny or whatever? Or like, what does my audience want to hear? And those are great questions, but they're really not your first question. Your first question needs to be, what is the deepest, most important, and most helpful truth that I can tell at this particular moment? Like, get really clear with like, what is true here? What is true about this topic I'm writing a paper about? What is true about this speech I need to give? What is true about this meeting I need to speak at? Whatever it is, be really clear. Now, you may not be able to tell that whole truth, right? It might not be appropriate. That's okay. But just get clear on what's true. Then you could ask the questions of like, okay, what can I say to this audience? What will make me, sound the way I want to sound? That's fine. But you've got to start by saying something true. I think a good example of this is President Obama's 2004 Democratic Convention speech, where the guy actually started that speech by saying, let's face it, my presence on this stage tonight is pretty unlikely. He then went on to talk about his Kenyan father who was a goat herder. I mean, no political consultant in 2004 would have been like, okay, if you've got presidential ambitions, really emphasize your foreign roots. Like, yeah, you should really do that. But he said something true. Like, part of his family is from Kenya, and his mom grew up in America. He has this diverse history, and he just got up and he said, "Yeah, I know. Why do you think it's unusual for a black guy named Barack Hussein Obama to be on this stage tonight? I'm just going to name it." And when you say something deeply true like that, you gain credibility, you gain trust. It's really bracing. So say something true. My second thing is talk like yourself. I don't know what it is, but so often when people go to write something or they go to speak, they kind of put on this weird formal voice. So it's like, "Good morning. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here today." Like, do you say that to your friends, your teachers, your parents? Are you like, "Good morning, mom. It is a pleasure and an honor." You don't do that. You're like, "Hey, good morning. It's great to be here. Oh, I'm so happy to be here." Right? That's how I would greet people. So that's how I'm going to do it when I speak. You often hear politicians being like, "We need to put hardworking American middle class family values first." Like, no one has ever turned to another person and been like, "I'm just thinking we should really put hardworking American middle class family." Like, people don't talk that way. So if you wouldn't say something to one person, don't say it or write it to many people. Like, it doesn't get better. Really try to talk in your own voice. And then my final and probably most important piece of advice is show, don't tell. So what does that mean? I can tell you that my friend John is anxious, uptight, neurotic, obsessive, very exacting, and precise. Or I could tell you I left my friend John alone in my kitchen for 10 minutes, and when I returned, he had alphabetized my spice rack and was centering the magnets on my refrigerator with a ruler. Now, if I call you tomorrow morning, will you remember the 6 adjectives, or will you remember those images of my friend? You're going to remember the images because our minds are primed to do that. A real life example of this is actually how Michelle Obama started her 2016 Democratic Convention speech. She could have started that speech by saying, "On my daughter's first day of school in the White House, I was scared, I was worried, I was nervous, I was afraid, I was uneasy." Adjectives, telling. Instead, she said, "On my daughter's first day of school, I watched them climb into those big black cars with all those large men with guns, and I saw their little faces pressed up against the window, and I asked myself, what have we done?" Okay, that image, you can't unsee that image, right? It's so memorable. She doesn't have to tell you she's afraid, nervous, worried. You feel it in your heart. So the thing to really ask yourself is like, can I see this? Can someone see what I'm talking about? Can they walk away with an image that will really stay with them? So those are my 3 best tips.
Since you're a communications and messaging person, do you think we're doing a good job of marketing Judaism to disengage Jews? What could we be doing better?
So, I think a lot of people are working really hard on this, and there's a lot of people doing amazing work and organizations and groups doing amazing work. What I do sometimes worry about is I think sometimes in some parts of the Jewish world, the message to disengage Jews can be something like Judaism equals anti-Semitism plus Israel. That's Judaism. Take it or leave it. And anti-Semitism is obviously a huge issue. Right? It always has been. It is rising, it is scary, it is real. So let's not in any way diminish that. Israel has always been central to the Jewish story. It's very important. Let's not in any way diminish that. These are 2 incredibly important parts of Judaism. But what about the other 4,000 years of Judaism? What about our beautiful holidays and our meaningful life cycle rituals and our ethics and our theology and our history and our culture and our languages and our music and our food and our arts, right? There's so much more to Judaism. So when you reduce it to just 2 elements, it's very disrespectful to our incredible tradition, and it really turns a lot of people off. I would rather see a message that instead of Judaism equals anti-Semitism plus Israel, I want to see a message that says Judaism equals powerful, transformative, life-changing wisdom about how to be a good person, how to live a meaningful life, and how to find profound spiritual connection. I think that kind of more positive message, I think, will kind of bring in more people.
Thank you again for sharing so candidly with us, Sarah. I know that our USYers have been filling up the chat box with more questions for you. So if it's okay with you, let's see what they're saying.
All right.
Okay, here's your first question from a USYer. Your work proves that writing, language, and speaking hold great power. How do some or all of those three methods of communication yield power in Judaism, and how can we all channel that power to enact change in our world?
Wow, that is an incredibly deep question, and we could like spend months answering that question, or lifetimes really. But I think this you really whoever asked this question, you really put your fingers on something so fundamental about Judaism. We care deeply about the word, right? Like there is just endless Jewish commentary on how we use our speech. Do we speak kindly? Do we avoid shaming people? Are we honest? Because there's really a sense, as it says, and I think it's Proverbs somewhere in the Tanakh, that life and death is in the tongue, right? The power of life and death is in the tongue, which is like in the words you say, which you can say like, okay, easy, that's an exaggeration. No, it's not, right? If you think about the Holocaust didn't start with concentration camps and death camps. It started with propaganda, right? It started with words. It started with defamation. It started with all of this language. And so we have to be really careful about how we speak, how we write, how we talk, because these words actually have the power to dramatically change people's lives. Even something as simple as gossip. If Rena and I are colleagues or classmates, we get into a fight, and I just go out and I just tell all these people terrible things about Rena because I'm so mad at her. Just I say all these bad things, and then like the next day we make up. Just it was whatever, a misunderstanding. Well, I've just told a bunch of bad things about her, and maybe they've told other people those things who've told other people, and maybe in a couple of weeks someone's having a party and they're like, "Oh, I'm not inviting Rena. I heard some things about that girl." Right? Like I just really affected her social life just when I was getting something off my chest, when I was just angry. So I think, in terms of using words to make change, I think it is so important that we think really carefully about not just the words we use, but about how we say them. Judaism has so much very strong language about not shaming people. And it's something that I kind of struggle with because when I think someone is done something wrong or immoral, like I want to kind of humiliate them. Like I want to kind of call them out. And, there might be times when that's appropriate, where it's like a big company or a public figure. I mean, I think there are times, but, when you're in a small community with people, sometimes it can actually help just to take someone aside and be like, hey, can I talk to you? What you said, like it actually really hurt me and here's why. And you can actually get a lot further. I think shaming often kind of hardens people. So I think thinking not just about the intent of our words, but the impact of our words is really important. And I think that can help change people's minds. That can help kind of create a Jewish future that's more inclusive, more diverse, and I think more sustainable.
Our next question comes from Beth Littman. How does presidential speechwriting compare to how it's represented on shows like The West Wing?
Oh, great question. So, it really depends on the president. I will say, it's like shows like The West Wing. The West Wing is actually pretty accurate in terms of speechwriting because one of their producers is a guy named Eli Addy, who is chief speechwriter for Vice President Al Gore in the Clinton administration. So I think what it captures really well, it captures just the exhaustion. Like there's actually an episode where Toby brings in, they bring in this new speechwriter, Sam Seaborn, and both Toby and Sam take a crack at a speech. And Toby looks at I'm sorry, it's Bill Bailey. Bill Bailey is the name. Sorry, Bill Bailey is the new speechwriter. Toby looks at Bill's speech and he's embarrassed because it's so much better than what he wrote. And I do feel like you get tired, right? Like that they really capture that very well. You also can just get stuck on little things. And there's actually an episode where like Toby and Sam get obsessed with writing like a birthday greeting to someone. It's a long story, but I think they kind of capture just the struggle of speech writing, the exhaustion. But I also think like it seems like speeches get written really quickly on the West Wing, right? Where it's like Sam just like, writes a speech in 10 minutes or whatever. I mean, that can sometimes happen in the White House where you have to turn something around really quickly. But, oftentimes you actually have some time to write stuff and it's pretty solitary work, right? You're not going to see footage of like 12 hours of Sam Seaborn sitting alone in his office typing. But that actually is a lot of the work of speech writing, unfortunately. But I think finally the West Wing really did capture, at least, it felt true to my Obama administration experience in that the staff on the West Wing, they're all really patriotic and just deeply caring and kind people, and they really support each other. And that was so true in the Obama administration. I think we really had a sense that like we have this honor of serving the American people. And we just, we had such like, there was a real love for the people that you got to meet and know. Oftentimes in speeches, you're including the story of an actual person who has struggled with the issue that the speech is dealing with. And I just got to talk to so many amazing people who had had various challenges, and we were like celebrating them in a speech, and they were so excited and so proud. And it just, made me very proud to be an American. So I think they capture that sense of pride and patriotism quite well.
Here's another question about writing from Shoshana Daly. I have been told that I'm really good at writing, but it has always stressed me out a ton. How do you get over writing anxiety? Staring at a blank page is intimidating.
Oh my gosh, girlfriend, I I cannot even begin to tell you how much I empathize with what you're saying. I actually recently spoke to a former colleague of mine who was a speechwriter for President Obama, who has now written 2 books, and we were talking about how much we hate writing and how stressful we find it. Which, like, that seems crazy, right? Like, we both, I spent 8 years speechwriting the Obama administration. I then wrote a book, and I find writing so stressful. I hate sitting in front of a blank page. So I think that anxiety, that is so normal, right? That's actually part of being a great writer, I think, is just having that anxiety and that fear. And frankly, my drafts are so terrible. Like, my initial drafts of anything are so bad. In fact, one of my colleagues once said to me, Sarah, your writing process is that you basically just dump a bunch of like gobbledygook nonsense craziness on a page, and then you spend a week editing it. And that's actually a really great description of my writing process. So I think that a lot of time the anxiety comes from this misconception that you should just sit down and what you write should be beautiful and perfect in the first draft. No, it shouldn't. Right? It absolutely shouldn't. My first draft, my second draft, like my 20th draft, it takes me so many drafts to get to something good. And Anne Lamont, who's a writer who I love, she once said, she's like, everyone's drafts are terrible except for this one writer, and we all hate her. So I think just like knowing that all good writers struggle with this and find it so stressful and anxious, but that you just push through the anxiety and you give yourself permission to write terrible drafts and then to rewrite them and rewrite them until they become excellent.
Here's another question about Judaism. And in your opinion, how can politically engaged Jewish teens make the greatest impact in their communities right now?
Mm, that is a great question, especially the right now part of it, right? Where we're in a time of COVID. We all have a lot of restrictions on what we can and can't do. So I really am like very sensitive to just safety, right? The most important thing you can do is keep yourself and other people safe. Don't make COVID worse, right? That's actually the opposite of what you want to do. I think there are so many ways that you can help out right now. You guys as teenagers, you're old enough to volunteer for any number of organizations that are doing critically important work. So I was just reading about at my alma mater, my college, a couple of students, they're probably not much older than you guys, they started an organization where they just every week they call local residents at a senior citizens home. These are folks who, because of COVID, they can't have visitors, right? They're very isolated. They're pretty stressed because, there's a real fear of COVID spreading in these places. And they just every week they call them up, they talk to them, they spend time with them, right? That's something you can do. So I think that right now, just thinking about in your community if you want to kind of address just a lot of the needs, think about the people who are most struggling and most isolating. I think senior citizens are really struggling. So can you organize a way to like call into a senior citizens home and help? There are a lot of parents who are really struggling with trying to school their kids, right? Where school is it's virtual, it's not, it's really tough. Can you volunteer to tutor a kid on Zoom, right? Or just to read to a kid for an hour or two a week, just to give their parents a break, to kind of help out. I bet there are so many Jewish organizations in your communities that are doing various kinds of like social justice, tzedakah, Tikun Olam kind of work. And I think that just reaching out to them, right? I think that there's so much that you can do, even just from your home, and that there are ways to volunteer safely in a socially distanced way as well. So I think that like right now, actually, the needs are probably so great in our communities. I think that's a powerful way to volunteer. I also think there are a lot of movements like for social justice, for racial justice right now, that a lot of young people are getting involved. And I think that taking the time to educate yourself, to really learn, to read books, to understand kind of the racial injustices that our country has experienced and is continuing to experience, I think that's a really important thing to do too.
Our next question comes from Isaac. What Jewish principles have made their way into your career as a speechwriter?
Oh, what a great question. Um, so many of them, I think in many ways, like I'm so shaped by my Judaism. It's just like every day things will come up. Like I'll start to shame someone on email and they'll be like, no, remember what I read about shaming? I'm not going to do it. Or, I will, I will know someone's that someone I know is sick or struggling, and I'll be like, oh, I'm such an introvert. I don't want to call them. I don't want to, but then I'll think, no, like chesed, presence, I need to do this. I think in terms of speech writing, I think the insight that is really the core animating insight of Judaism is the idea that we're all created in the image of God. And look, whether you believe in God, don't believe in God, it really doesn't matter. What that phrase really means, it means that, as a rabbi named Yitz Greenberg beautifully put it, and he's drawing on Jewish tradition, the idea of being created in the divine image means that every single one of us is infinitely worthy, right? You can't put a price on a human life. It means every single one of us is totally equal. No one is better than anyone else. And it means that each of us is completely unique. There is no one else like us. And, you can say like, okay, that's pretty obvious. We all believe that, but like, no, we don't, right? Think about in your life, have you walked by someone on the street who's asked you for help? And maybe you've like given them $1, maybe you've said, oh, I'm sorry, not today, and walked by. If that person had been some huge celebrity who you like completely admire, I guarantee, right, any of us would have stopped and thought like, oh my, yes, I'll give you $1. I want your autograph. Like, we don't think that a celebrity and someone who's struggling on the street, we don't actually value them equally. We don't see them as both created in the divine image. We value people differently based on their status, their wealth, their beauty, their fame. And, when I think about every speech I wrote in the White House, every speech the Obamas was giving was actually articulating this in the image idea. Like when Michelle Obama spoke about educating girls around the world, what she was saying is that every single one of these girls is infinitely worthy. She was saying these girls are fundamentally equal to every child on this planet, including my daughters. And she was saying each of these girls has a unique world of possibility and potential to honor us or to offer us, and we can't squander that. So like I began to see that in the image idea that really values every human life as sacred and precious, it kind of infused everything that I wrote.
Our next question comes from Alexa Morcellis. How do you manage the differences you may feel between your religious beliefs and political beliefs?
That's a great question. So, the funny thing is, I get a variation of this question a lot, which is like, what do you do if you disagree with the person you're writing for and they want to say something that you disagree with, right? So, like, what if the person I'm writing for says something that actually really is contrary to my Jewish values and my Jewish tradition? And the answer is like, I don't put myself in that situation. I think, for me, it's really important for me to find people who I write for who share my values, right? They don't necessarily have to share my religious practice, right? I write for people of all religious backgrounds, but they do have to share my most core Jewish values in the image being, primary among them. So, I won't, I only write for people who share my beliefs. Now, look, I once wrote for someone who had a different view than I did on the death penalty. I'm strongly opposed to the death penalty. This person is in favor of the death penalty. Her family has experienced multiple pretty brutal crimes, and that was just her opinion. And you know what? She's entitled to her opinion. But, I was very junior in the office, but the guy I worked for, who was her speechwriter, he had an agreement with her that if she ever wanted to talk about the death penalty, because he was against it too, he wouldn't write it. She was going to be on her own. And I think with one issue like that just never really came up in our work, I think that's okay. But I think beyond that, I don't write just to write. I write because I want to promote particular causes and values and beliefs. So I really have to. So I've never really experienced a fundamental conflict of values. I have had moments where a really important speech was on Yom Kippur or the day after Yom Kippur, and I had to really kind of balance like, okay, what does it mean for me to observe Yom Kippur in a way that is rigorous and meaningful and real, but also honor the Jewish values of social justice and caring for the vulnerable, which this particular speech happened to be about. How do I balance that? And I had to kind of come up with a way to both attend Yom Kippur services and to really do what I thought was a meaningful fast and observance. And I also did some work. And that was actually a really hard decision for me, right? I talked to a number of rabbis. I really reflected deeply on it. And what I came to understand was that it wasn't like, doing a rigorous Yom Kippur observance, that's the Jewish value, and working on this speech is not the Jewish value. Jewish values were at play in both of these situations, and I had to balance them. And I had to kind of really think deeply about my own understanding of what it means to be a Jew. And I had to really do some balancing, and that's not easy. And I think, many of you may confront that in your own life. And I think the key is just to be really knowledgeable about Jewish tradition and about where you want to fit into it, and to have lots of great mentors, rabbis, Jewish educators, family, friends, people who can kind of help guide you through these moments of challenge.
Our next question, actually our last question, comes from Jeffrey Giddles. And it is, if you could write for any figure in the history of American politics, alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh my gosh, this is a great question. It's funny. My answer often surprises people, but I am actually most interested in writing for people who have a really unique voice that just cuts through and that I can kind of relate to. So, I look at the great orators of American history, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the greatest. I look at the women like, the Sojourner Truths, the suffragists. Like, there are so many amazing people in our history, but I think the voices that I kind of most identify with and are moved by right now are the voices of a lot of young people. I look at like the students who came from Parkland, Florida and across the country after the Parkland shooting, and just the way they spoke out loud about gun reform and about gun safety and about, basic safety for children in America. I thought it was really powerful. I think young leaders like them, like Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani girls' education activist, like Greta Thunberg, the climate activist, like those are voices that really excite me. I mean, if anything, I think I'd want to write for them because I think their voices are so raw and visceral and authentic and real. And that's the kind of writing I like. I don't really like super scripted, polished, formal writing, which you kind of find a lot in politics. So I think I would actually probably probably those younger voices are really what most call to me, even though there's a lot of great orators through history. I think that those youthful, fresh voices are probably where I'd want to write. So it's very recent history. It's technically history, but quite recent.
Wow, I wish we had another hour to keep going. But Sarah, thank you again so much for joining us at I See Everywhere. You were actually one of the first people my fellow co-chairs and I hope to bring to IC, and it's really a dream come true to learn with and from you. And I know our
Thank
community is
you.
really grateful as well.
It is such a joy. It was such a joy to be in conversation with you at 3 in the morning Jerusalem time. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. I know you've been on a lot of Zoom, so I'm really, really happy you're part of this evening tonight. And I wish you all the very best.